afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Genuinely Care About You podcast. My name is Christina S. Wilcox, and I am your host. And on this podcast, we discuss everything related to mental health, neurodiversity, faith, creativity, music, books, cozy video games, all of that. So, hi. It is currently 7:30 for me a.m. because that is just the time where I can record this. And I'm looking a little rough because it is 7:30. And if you're watching the video, you can see that. But I have my candle lit. I had my coffee. I have a nice fuzzy blanket wrapped around part of me for comfort. And I mentioned on my Instagram story that this podcast was going to be focused on ADHD. Not necessarily like what ADHD is, but just some symptoms of it. I don't know if I should call them symptoms. It's just like some behavioral things that have come up for me recently that I've had forever. Like they're not new, but they're causing me more distress than I remember, I guess. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to talk about some of my favorites from this past month in April. The first of which was a book called Baker's Magic. And I listened to this book on Scribd, which if you have an audiobook subscription, I honestly recommend listening to this book through audio because it's like a full performance. It is so cool. And it's a middle grade fantasy novel. So it's for younger kids. And I wanted something that was just cozy, simple, good vibes. And it ended up being such a good story. And I genuinely didn't see the plot twist coming, which it was kind of an obvious plot twist. So maybe I just was really zoned out, but I was not expecting it to be as emotional as it was. I actually ended up giving it like 4.75 to 5 stars because of how much I keep thinking about it and like what a good time I had while reading it. It is, if you are looking this spring and summer for a fantasy novel that the magic system is literally baking, like it revolves around baking. There are other forms of magic in it, but the person you follow is about like pastry magic. And it is just perfect. Like it was such a good book. Definitely a favorite for this month. The next thing I wanted to talk about for my favorite things in April are noise canceling headphones. I got into a pretty good habit earlier last year of wearing noise canceling headphones when I went to the grocery store or doing random activities, but I fell off of the habit and I recently started again, specifically wearing noise canceling headphones as I work or throughout the day after I've had a day of like a lot of sensory input or information input. I recently wore them to the dentist, which I've never done before. And even though it was still awful, it helped immensely. I guess my favorite for the month of April is learning how to work with your sensory needs as opposed to suppress them or be against them. For my noise canceling headphones, I use the Loop earbuds, this is not sponsored. I genuinely purchased them from an influencer that I watch. But I use those as well as my AirPod Maxes. What is going on? It's really going to bug me. I hope you guys can't hear what is happening with these headphones. But, yeah, noise canceling headphones, embracing your sensory needs, definitely a favorite for April. Another favorite for April would be the Book Leo on YouTube. I've been following her forever, but for some reason in April, her videos hit different. Like, I just was binging them. Even ones I'd seen a couple times already. She just became my safe place for the month of April. So if you are looking for a booktuber that has kind of like mystical, dark academia vibes, I definitely recommend her. 2 other YouTube channels I've been loving. I'm a huge lo-fi beats person, or background video person. And the Cozy Nordic and Bootleg Boy have amazing background videos. The Cozy Nordic, they're all themed around like rainy days in Scandinavia. And then the Bootleg Boy, they have some anime related videos, but their background videos are like the mystical, magical cabin in the woods. Like, it's just so nice. Or they have even like different video game themes, like the Last of Us background video, where it's just like the buildings and the greenery. Like, it's so pretty. So those were favorite YouTube related things of mine for April. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I got a little bit back into Animal Crossing this April. I want to start streaming again. I know I keep saying that, and I will keep saying it until the day I die, I think, because there's not a lot of time for it in this season of life, but I'm hoping that there will be soon. I really miss it, and I want to stream video games and even do like body doubling type of videos, which is essentially just like work with me or write with me, study with me kind of videos, because they help me. Like, I watch them so that I can get things done. And I would love to do one myself. What else? Oh, just a favorite memory. So we went on our first camping trip of the season a couple weeks ago, and not a couple weeks ago, this past weekend. And when I tell you, besides one time when we went camping in Moab in July, don't recommend, don't do that. It was literally 110 degrees. But this past weekend was probably the worst conditions we've ever had. It was so cold and so windy. But my favorite memory was in the dead of night when we all just like could not sleep. Moose in his crate in our tent was so cold that we had to take him out, and Noah stuffed him in his sleeping bag, and they snuggled together the whole night. And I could have just stayed up and looked at them. It was the cutest thing I've ever seen. And I will be thinking about it for a lot. Like, the mental image I have, it just was like core memory made. Yeah, those are a couple of my April favorites. I want to get better at easing our way into deeper discussion as opposed to jumping right in, because even though that's like my MO, I realize it might not be great for podcast format, which you guys can give feedback on always, because this is such a small podcast. I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. But with that said, moving into the topic of today, which is just some ADHD behavior things that have been affecting my life recently. I think I mentioned in a previous podcast episode where I had a good month and a half where I couldn't have access to my ADHD medication, which if you also went through that, oof, I'm so sorry. So sorry, because it really is so difficult it makes life difficult to function if you have to like be in very, for lack of a better word, neurotypical executive functioning spaces. And basically, I want to talk about executive functioning because it really is such a huge aspect of even how I got diagnosed with ADHD. And I've been learning a lot about it in this book I'm reading called Divergent Mind. And executive functioning, if you're not familiar with it, is just like your ability to do basic tasks like doing the dishes, going to the grocery store, doing the laundry. Executive functioning is basically just being a person, like a normal, ordinary person. And for a lot of neurodivergent people, most neurodivergent people, which includes like people who are autistic, ADHD, sensory processing disorder, even highly sensitive people, all of these things, executive functioning is very difficult and can be. And it really is for ADHD. And it is for us who have ADHD, which I'm learning language around having ADHD versus being ADHD. Like there's a whole movement kind of going on around that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. And because sometimes it really does, it doesn't feel like I have ADHD. It really does feel like I just am ADHD. Obviously, I know I'm a person apart from ADHD, but it's how my brain works. So it's weird to describe it as like a disease or something I have when it's just like my chemical makeup in my brain, if that makes sense. So I wanted to talk about some aspects of executive functioning that have been really frustrating for me, because I've been talking a lot about this with like my therapist and Noah and people in my life, because ADHD makes me incredibly creative. Like at a previous job I had someone tell me that they wish they could have me in every meeting so they could squeeze my brain out, like so they could just use my brain for all creative ideas. Creativity comes really naturally to me, and I'm really good at like high level problem solving, and I don't know, the things that I'm good at, like I'm really good at. And that was a theme in school as well, like with writing English and history. Like I had very specific interests, even songwriting. Like just for me, creative expression is something I excel in and can be like at an expert level at almost. And that can be confusing for other people and myself when I can barely go to the grocery store without having a panic attack. And that's kind of this reality of executive functioning, is I have been really over celebrated for the things I'm gifted at, and then hyper criticized for the areas I fall short in, because it's like my ability to do things really well doesn't seem to match up with the things that I suck at. And for me, that can be like, I really struggle with directions and details. I can read something 10 times over and just like still miss a spelling error or like a concept that's trying to be communicated. I have a very specific way that I need to learn how to do things, or else it'll take me a long time. But if I learn it that specific way the first time, I'll get it in an instant. Like it's just hard to have, like it's hard to need accommodation for that in all aspects of life. And it has been, because ADHD is so stigmatized, like it's still similarly to OCD, like ADHD is used as an adjective to describe like just being scattered and oops, squirrel, like just whatever, when literally I can get very frustrated and discouraged by this gaping hole almost in like my abilities to function. And in this book I'm reading, Divergent Mind, I'm learning about that frustration a lot, because with people who have ADHD, you're not just sensitive to sensory processing, but you're sensitive to criticism and really sensitive to rejection. And it can cause a lot of frustration internally, where it feels like the world is crashing. And I've been trying to explain that for so long to people, of like, all of a sudden, it just literally feels like the world is ending inside of me for something seemingly really small, or over something seemingly small. And I'm realizing that it's because of this gap almost in my abilities. And it doesn't mean that I can't do the dishes or can't do laundry or can't be successful at executive functioning. It just takes me so much effort to be successful at it if I'm forced to do it in a way that doesn't work for me. Like, if I'm able to do it fully in a way that works for my brain, I can do it. But because when you're neurodivergent, so much of your life is adjusting to the world and adapting to what works for others around you, that it adds this whole other level of just energy depletion. And I have been seeing that so much because, again, I can be so attentive. It's weird to have ADHD, and I consider myself to be a very focused person. And in this book, it talks about how ADHD isn't actually a lack of attention or an inability to give attention. It's the inability to prioritize and harness attention at will. And that, I think, also is why I struggle with executive functioning, because even if when I look at a list of tasks, I can't prioritize them in order of importance. When I'm on my medication, it's a lot easier for me to do that. And my brain, it helps kickstart my brain a little bit. But I kind of can I hyper focus on one of the tasks, no matter where it lies in prioritization, and focus on that, and then really hyper focus on that to the point where I could get like so much work done. Like, the amount of work that I can get done when I'm hyper focused, again, is why it's so confusing when I fail at really small things to other people. Again, as I'm saying this, I am also realizing in this experience how hard I am on myself. And I'm sure if you also are neurodivergent, you experience that as well. And I think that this experience might be, wow, my headphones again. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Why? This experience might be less obvious to the people around me because of me trying to not show my symptoms to other people. That gap, it's getting harder and harder to not do that, because it's just like you burn out when you're doing double the mental work to literally survive. You just get burned out. And that's why I think in my life, both in work and my relationships, every aspect of my life, like, all of a sudden people will be like, I don't understand how you just dropped the ball, or like, I thought you were more responsible than this, or how come you were so good at noticing these details earlier, but now you're not. And I don't know. I'm not experiencing anything super dramatic in my life that is leading me to talk about this. I'm just feeling it all internally right now. Like, I'm feeling and noticing the burnout, I guess, and seeing how much mental work I'm doing, and why that disables me sometimes to do different things, and things that are, again, involving executive functioning, like the dishes or laundry or making my bed, or as gross as it is, like brushing my teeth and being a sanitary person. Like, it can be, anxiety and depression is so linked with ADHD, and I can spiral very quickly. And I'm trying to be more aware of that spiral. And I guess in me communicating all of this today, I really just needed an outlet to say it out loud. And I've been learning that, though I think in relation to OCD and other things that are a little bit more difficult to talk about for me, sharing my experience with ADHD is actually quite healing and cathartic, because it's what has made me feel so different for so long. And just the experience of watching other people go to the grocery store, look at a list and know what to do, grasp directions so quickly, like all of those things from a very young age, I noticed that I really struggled with. And I think another great example of this in school is that I was really amazing at homework. Like, I would get A's on homework assignments and be like at the top of my class majority of the time because of, especially if it was a subject I was interested in, I just would excel so much. But when I had to take a test, I can't tell you the amount of teachers that spoke to my parents saying, "We don't understand what's wrong with Christina because she's so amazing at homework. She grasps really difficult concepts quickly. But sometimes in class, she struggles to she daydreams, which again, is a huge part of ADHD, the inattentiveness that has gone overlooked for a lot of people who are getting diagnosed later in life. It's a huge aspect of ADHD, just the daydreaming. Like, if I got bored, I just would, I'm out. I can't. There's not really anything you can do to get me to focus at that point. But they would talk about that, but they also would say the second we have to do a test, she just fails and it plummets her grades, but she's an amazing student and we don't understand why she fails these tests. And I can tell you why I failed the tests. One, when I take tests, I can't pay attention. Having to sit still for that long and focus on these topics that I know a lot about, it's like all the information leaves my brain and I can hear, feel, and experience everything in the room to a degree that doesn't allow me to get my actual thoughts across. And also the rejection sensitivity. I would get so anxious about failing that I just would be paralyzed. And I'm seeing that pattern, like I've been saying this whole time, in my life now as an adult, but just not related to homework and tests. It's just like, I think about things I've done for work and I've done like throughout my career. And there are so many things that I've done that are so cool and so hard. Like, I've juggled a lot at the same time in different areas and seasons in my life, to the point where it would it makes sense that I'm being held to a standard that is high because of the work that I produce. But then it just kind of all comes crashing down, and it makes you feel like you're tricking people into, like, I literally had that thought the other day of just like, sometimes I feel like I am this shell of a person, which sounds so depressing, but I mean it in a way of like, on the outside, because of real aspects and valid aspects of my work ethic, I just look like this amazing person. But then once the pressure is on, once criticism becomes more real, once there are more eyes on me, once I'm having to be in more spaces that cause more sensory or information input and processing, it's just like people are confused. Again, like I've been told so many times, like, I don't understand what happened with you, which is so traumatic to hear over and over again, by the way. Like, it's just not a good thing to say to anyone, regardless, but hearing it so many times of like, we thought you were this, but now you're looking like this, and I just don't understand what's wrong with you. Like, me either. I didn't either. I had no language for what was happening in my life. And now that I do, it's so painful to think about younger me and how much this struggle that I've had my whole life and now in adulthood too is not my moral fault. It is how my brain is wired, and when I actually have the ability to take care of myself and how my brain is wired, I can do amazing things, and I do amazing things. But when I can't take care of myself and I'm forced into all of these spaces that make it really difficult to function, yeah, I can produce out of survival for a bit, and it can be really good work, but then it does go downhill, and things do get missed. And it feels really good to say all of this out loud. And I hope that if you are someone who also has ADHD or is neurodivergent or even just struggles with feeling like your brain is different and you don't have a label or a box for it yet, I'm just so with you. I'm so with you in it, because this is real life. This is how we talk about, again, mental health advocacy. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way. And we are so focused on being mentally healthy that we forget mentally healthy looks different for so many people. And if we're not willing to create systems for people who are neurodivergent or have different struggles to be mentally healthy, we're not making progress. And I think that it is so amazing that mental health is being prioritized and has become even almost taboo. But if, just like so many other things, if we're only focusing on mental health for people who don't have a mental illness or developmental disorder, we're still not moving forward, because there are people who are still so deep in stigma as we are supposedly pioneering this mental health awareness, where there has to be a level of acceptance for people who are different, always. And that goes across so many aspects of society. But if we're not accepting that people are different and that mental health will look differently for different people, it's just, what are we doing? What are we doing? And as someone, I'm so privileged to have access to a therapist, to have access to resources. There are so many marginalized groups that do not have access to a fraction of what I have access to. And it just makes me so angry that under this shiny blanket of mental health awareness are still people who are really, really struggling. And even as a very privileged person, I consider myself to be under that blanket. Like, it's still really, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And I know that's frustrating to hear. It's like, what else do we need to work on? What else do we have to do? What other thing are we championing? Like, what, it feels like there's so many things we're fighting for. But I think that's good. I think that is good. I think that is a normal thing to happen as society evolves. And I'm excited to see how systems improve one day for neurodivergent people and for people specifically who have ADHD, for women and marginalized women who have ADHD. There are just so many layers to that. But I wanted to share some of my real life raw experience with you today because I'm just starting to believe that my voice and story deserves to be heard because it can help other people, which sounds cliche and is kind of the whole point of this podcast, but it's blowing my mind how I can get emotional about it. I have gotten so many messages from people who are getting diagnosed with OCD and ADHD and a myriad of whatever else for the first time because of something I said. And that is so important. It's the most important thing I can do with my voice. Gosh, y'all, it is 8 a.m. It is 8 a.m. Why? But anyway, this was a very emotional, hopefully informative, and I hope interesting podcast, especially if you are not neurodivergent and you're listening and you know someone who has ADHD or other developmental, just different neural pathways in their brain, anyone who is different from you. I think it's so important that I'm really passionate about people who are where it's easy, quote unquote, to fit into society's systems, that you also fight for people where it's harder. And it's not fully your responsibility at all, but I think that as much as I can implore you to take our hand and fight for things together, then I'm doing a good thing. And yeah, sending you all the love if you are someone who is also struggling with executive functioning or just struggling in general in this season of life to keep up. I think feeling like you can't keep up regardless of how your brain works is a very normal feeling and doesn't have to be like psychoanalyzed. And I hope that this episode has been a soft place to land. And again, I hope it was informative or relatable in some way. And I can't wait for the next episode and to speak to you again. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. As my therapist says, be gentle, take good care of yourself. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week.